We are privileged to have ZimCode that has graciously supported our discussions and interaction and conversations this morning in this particular session. And what we want to achieve at the end of our discussions and conversations this morning is we would like to create space and platform for our exchange of ideas and knowledge that would promote debt justice in our continent of Africa, but also to, where possible, interrogate existing and emerging schools of thought on public debt management and issues around debt justice in Africa. We will also be interested to see if there are different knowledge products out there that have been produced with regards to debt justice movements, and also any researches that are there that can support policy reforms that we need in as far as public debt management is concerned. So before I get into inviting our able panelists that we have this morning, I would like to invite Dr. Gordon Moyo, who is coming from Public Policy Research Institute in Zimbabwe, just to set the ball rolling, bring us in the frame of the conversations that we are going to have this morning regarding the different schools of thought on public debt management and debt justice, as I have indicated. And we know these issues are touching so many areas, including issues around climate financing, climate change, the different shocks that are happening, and the conversations that we have had yesterday, and the challenges that are there. So we will love to get all that through a platform setting, through what Dr. Moyo is going to share with us. Then we'll have our panelists that will now unpack what Dr. Moyo will share, and we'll follow that through different questions that will provoke thoughts and also encourage our participants in this particular discussion to share their views, their understanding, and comments with regards to the discussions that we'll have. I hope that's a fair game, right? Beautiful. Now let me invite Dr. Moyo just to set the platform and provoke our thoughts. Thank you. Okay. One of the members here is just asking me, who is Dr. Moyo? And I will leave that to him just to introduce himself, who he is. But of course, I've told you that he's coming from Public Policy Research Institute in Zimbabwe. Over to you, Dr. Moyo.
Hello. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an African, at least from where I come from, to introduce yourself and start, putting on the table layers and layers of your CV. If you do that, it is a something. So I will not do it. Safe to say, I am a passionate, I am a passionate scholar who is interested in the issues that we are here for. That's my introduction of Gordon. But otherwise, if I happen to introduce myself, I'll do it as I engage you down the lane. But thank you very much, ZimCode and everybody else who has, put this panel together. My forte is to put on the table just 5 key issues to provoke debate, to provoke thinking, and discussion on the issues of justice, debt justice for me. I will not get into public financial management. I think that can be done by the panelists as they discuss. But for me, I'm more interested on debt justice. But to do that, allow me to take a broader perspective to locate the issues of debt justice in Africa from a more broader and generic perspective. And I will define that as global storms. I will locate debt justice from a context of global storms that we are currently facing as a continent and as humanity. And I would like to provoke the mind here because I come from an academic background and I'm academic. And yesterday, when OPA started and said he is putting on the table a theoretical framework to engage us, he touched my nerve. He touched my intellectual G-spot. Because, or a G for genius. Because there's been some kind of de-intellectualization of the public sphere in Africa. Over the years, we have seen intellectuals retracting, withdrawing from the public sphere and not engaging. So when we see our seniors like OPA coming back and re-intellectualizing the space, it is important. So I put on the table, number one, that currently we have a global storm that we all understand. The global storm where we have the shifting geographies of power from the global north to the global south or to the global east, thereby creating a kind of confusion in the setup of the global system. And in that system, Africa is affected and debt issues of debt justice are affected. By shifting geographies of power from the global north and to the global south, I'm talking about the rise of the emerging economies and the emergent economies like China and others. When they are coming up and when they have come in, obviously the global system has been changed. And what are we witnessing in terms of issues of debt in Africa? We are witnessing where in the past we had African countries being indebted to multilateral institutions up north, being indebted to the countries in the transatlantic states over the years. But today, we are seeing more and more African countries being indebted to the countries in the south, in particular China. And today, we have African countries owing almost 40% of their debt to the Chinese, which means China has become a major player. And we need research. We need to understand what this means. Is China coming in as part of the change that we want, helping African countries to get out of debt? But as we see today, we see more and more African countries indebted to China, particularly the countries in the south. In Southern Africa, I've seen that. I come from a country which is heavily indebted and is indebted to China. And I'm not here to criticize China, colleagues. This is not a critique of China. This is just an objective analysis. We have criticized the West, and I think you have a bag full of the criticism of the multilateral institutions, the Western countries. So I do not need to repeat that. So I'm saying we see a number of countries being indebted to China, and we need research on that. And one problematic area with regards to China, we have a number of institutions outside Africa researching on China. If you look at Harvard, That's where a center for research about the issues of debt in China and the rest of the world are. And less we of that in Africa. So there is a need for us to understand, to unpack and decouple what the rise of China and the other emerging economies mean to debt justice in Africa. One good example is that of the resource-backed loans. We have a number of deals that are being arranged between the Chinese Beijing and our African governments. And some of those loans are not declared to Parliament, are not known by the citizens. We need researchers, we need advocates, we need civic society to go deep into the surface or deeper and try to understand what does that mean. Are we going back to the foreignization of African land because of the resources that we are mortgaging to the East? We know we have mortgaged to the West already. Are we excited about mortgaging our resources to the East today? So we need African scholars and Africanist scholars to go deep and understand and unpack so that the rest of the citizens will appreciate the rise of these of the East and the shifting geographies of power and economy to the global East. So that is important for us to understand. As researchers, as advocates, as civic society, is a question that we need to ask ourselves rather than just celebrate. 2 weeks ago, is it 2 weeks ago or last week, I was in South Africa where the BRICS were. And I saw the excitement, a lot of excitement by a number of people there. And when I raised the issues that I'm raising here, it was like I was a lone voice because people are so excited about the Chinese challenging the West. But are we going to, as Africans, move from one molester to another molester? Are we going to shift from one center that has been abusing us to another center that is abusing us? I think the need for African agency, for African scholars, for African leadership to say, where do we stand as Africa? Where do we look at, how do we look at our resources? How do we leverage when we are engaging China, when we are engaging Brazil, when we are engaging the rest of the world, rather than a premature celebration of the extension of the BRICS, for example, or for the rising of the East. I think it is important for Africa to locate itself so that the issues of debt, because we see the debt problem with our relation with the West, we see the debt problem with our relation with the East. So where do we stand? So as advocates, as policy thinkers, policy shapers, and advocates, I think there's a need to research on that, understand, unpack it, make it simpler, and move it to the communities. Number two for me, the global storm is that of climate. I think it's now common cause that climate change is real. Climate change is a problem. And it's more problematic to the Africans because one, Africa did not, as we would all know, I suppose, that we have not contributed really to the greenhouse emissions that have polluted the atmosphere. Less than 3% of our contribution can be attributed to that. And yet we are affected. I mean, look at Mozambique, look at Malawi, look at KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, look at Zimbabwe, look at Angola and the rest of the world, of Africa. We have climate change real. Of course, the resources that are coming to support climate adaptation, climate mitigation in Africa, they are coming as loans. That's the problem. If most of the resources, climate finance that is coming to Africa to support are loans, whether those loans are coming from the West or from the East, but they are all loans. And less is in the form of grants, less is in the form of reparations, which we agreed in COP27 is it beginning of this year. So what is important is that we need, as African as researchers, African scholars, African advocates, to say, wait a minute, how do we locate ourselves? How do we challenge? A lot of work has been done by Oxfam. I mean, Oxfam has been doing a lot of work and others to unpack that problem. But my biggest problem is that the solutions that are being put on the table are solutions that are market-based solutions. When people come to us and say, look, let's go with the green bonds, let's go with debt swaps, all those are market-based solutions. They are good for capital, they are good for business, they are good for profits. And look at the downside. The downside is that very little is happening to the people. Very little is happening to mitigate the problems on the ground. So the issues of climate are important. The solutions that are coming are actually piling the problems more to Africa. They are actually creating more problems because when you are selling bonds, people are buying bonds back. At the end of the day, you are indebted. You are supposed to pay at some point. And Africa has not been able to do that. So we need to rethink about locating the issues of justice, raise the volume high. It has been raised, but it has not been raised enough. We need to raise the volume high in terms of climate financing, because in climate financing, which is marketed in smart ways, smart technologies, it is just sugarcoating. When it comes to the implementation and the impact to the people on the ground, you'd see that it is neoliberalism. The green bonds are just a neoliberal approach to market solution. Instead of these countries that have polluted the air, paying reparations, damages for loss, they are bringing funds in the form of loans. And those loans are going to be paid by our children and are not able, our economies are not able at the moment to respond to the climate change and also to pay back those loans and the debts. Number 3 for me, the issue of COVID, a global storm. It is receding, it has receded in terms of perhaps public health, but in terms of economy and in terms of debt, it has not receded. In terms of debt, it is actually rising. In terms of debt, it is actually rising. And I want to say to you, colleagues, see, with the COVID, I don't want to say a lot, but with the COVID, I have a problem with the international credit rating institutions that were raised yesterday. When the countries were under COVID, when the countries were struggling to support their populations and to support the elderly, the youth, and everybody else, the international credit rating agencies were actually busy. They were actually at work. It was time for them to be at work. Your Fitch investments, your Moody's, your Poor and Standard, they were at work and they were busy downgrading African countries that were seeking seeking for debt cancellation. The minute they raised their hands, we are here, we have a problem. We are here, we are Ethiopia. We wanted to get our debt restructured. You say that word, that you want your debt to be restructured. Immediately, the offices of the Moody's, Standard, Poor's, and the Fitch's immediately started working, downgrading. Once a country is downgraded by these rating agencies, it becomes very difficult for these countries to get to get funds from the capital markets. The capital markets become very expensive because it's a risky market. So we have had during COVID time, at a time when we needed the debt in Africa to be reduced or to be cancelled. The African countries were put on a spotlight where their credit ratings were reduced to level of junks and junks. As a result, the issues of debt that we are talking about. The debt that we are supposed to pay surely is a debt that was caused by a pen. Somebody who said, okay, you are now a junk. Immediately, the whole continent, the whole country is reduced to nothing and is supposed to pay these debts. So the issue of COVID and the issue of international credit rating agencies is a big problem, and we need research. We need scholars. We need advocates to work on that and see how do we challenge that. There's been a suggestion to have an African rating agency. Surely that could be an option. Surely it should be supported. But is it going to be supported by the outsiders? I think that's a question that we need to ask. And how do we make the outside or the external world, the international world, both the East and the North, to support the African rating agents? Because they will say, oh, okay, this is very subjective. It is only meant to support the African markets, which are not necessarily good markets. They are not objective. So those are some of the challenges that we face, and we need to look at that. We need to subject our thoughts, our minds, our research, ourselves, our intellectual capital to that. Number 4 for me. Number 4 is the old story of the global financial crisis of 2008, 2007, 2008. That time, when we had the global financial crisis, Africa was said to be rising, and there was a lot of writing, Africa, rising Africa, rising Africa, rising Africa. And we know that when the crisis struck the world, the financial crisis struck the world, then we began to have Africa rising story taking a twist, and by 2014, 2015, the story of Africa is rising was completely forgotten. And the problems, of course, which started in the United States and in Europe and elsewhere, were seen as if they were peripheral in Africa, but they were not, because right up to right now, we still have the residue of the problems of that time, because most of the countries started looking inside. Most of the grants, most of the countries that were giving aid could no longer give aid to the countries in the South. Up to now, as a result of the global financial crisis. So we need to look at that. Let's not look at it as a history. It is not far-fetched. It is as important as it was said yesterday. Colonialism, apartheidism, slavery, they are still part of our debt problem today. So is the issue of global financial crisis. We need to look at that and say, how do we connect the dates? The dots? How do you connect all these as scholars, so that when we are challenging, because when we are challenging or when we are engaging these creditors, these lenders, these multilateral institutions, you need to have facts, you need to have a historical record to say this is where we came from, this is where we are today, and this is why we need debt cancellation. This is why we need a moratorium. This is why we need a change in the structure, because you can have moratoriums, you can have debt cancellations, but without changing the structure of the economy, we will continue to have the problems. Remember, in the early 2000s, a number of countries, over 30 countries, got their debts cancelled. But today, most of those countries are back, they are in debt distress. Why? Because of the structures of the economy, the structures of the international system. So they are still in place. They were in place 500 years ago during the time of colonialism, apartheidism, slavery, and others. They are still in place. So we need the scholars, we need all of us advocates, civic society activists to engage on these issues. The fifth one for me, just in passing, because I know this could be a very dividing thing. Russia, the Russo-Ukraine war. We cannot forget about it. We cannot be silent. It is a global storm which is affecting Africa, which is affecting not just African debt, but African economies. So it is important as scholars to be clear, as civic society to have a clear voice. What is our clear voice? Are we divided just like the states? The African states are divided, they don't know what to do. Some will say they are now participating in solving the problems. At the same time, they are implicated as being part of the problem. So where do we stand? I think it is important for us as civil society, as think tanks, as all of development scientists, we need to have a clear understanding that the rise of Russia, the war in Russia is creating serious debts in Africa. We are having right now this what do you call it? The coups. Those coups are not unrelated to what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening in Russia. It's the story is connected. Because the Wagner group has been operating in all these areas where we are having all these things. And all these countries that are staging coups are getting guns, are getting material, ammunition, armory, without the knowledge of the citizens. And those armories, all those weapons it's a date. It's not free. They are not given free. It's either in terms of the resources. Our lithium, Zimbabwe is a country that is, by the way, Zimbabwe, there is lithium all over in Zimbabwe now. Zimbabwe is the largest lithium producer in Africa and is number 5 globally. And lithium is so important when it comes to smart energy, smart battery, the fourth industrial revolution. But who is mining that lithium? The lithium is being mined by the military, the militarisans, military business people, military commercialism is at stake. And these are the guys who are getting the funds. These are the guys, and it's on a date. And there are arrangements that are being made without the knowledge of the citizens. And this is happening across Africa. So we need to look at Russia, Ukraine war, not just as a war between those two countries, but because what is happening there has got implications to the rest of Africa and to date that we are discussing about. My proposal is what I began with, the issue of African agents. That's the proposal I put on the table for colleagues. African agents. African agents means African influence, collective conscience of Africa, collective influence of Africa, collective intelligence of Africans, working together, bargaining together, engaging together. No, it doesn't make sense for a country like Malawi, my brother, like Malawi, to be engaging China. Malawi engaging China on its own. Surely you are dwarf, you pretend. Yes, it's win-win. We are equal partners. We mutual respect. That's language. That's rhetoric. The reality is there will be a boss because of the financial capacity, because of what is behind Xi Jinping compared to Lazarus Chakwera there. So we can engage the rest of the world when we defragment, when we do defragmentation, coming together and working and engaging China as Africa, not as Zimbabwe, not as South Africa. So in that way, we will have an African agency, engaging United States, engaging everybody else. I'm just using China because this is emerging, but this applies to all of them. So colleagues, like I said, I'm just putting on the table for the purposes of provoking a debate and engagement. I can't say I've exhausted the point or I have explained anything. I've just provoked the debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moyo. He has eloquently covered the issues. And getting him covering the 4 global storms. Actually, when I was counting, there were 6 actually. It's fascinating that Africa indeed has quite a lot of challenges, but I'm happy that he has indicated propositions that can work in as far as bringing these issues to their logical solution is concerned. One thing he has emphasized is that as a continent, we cannot remain fragmented and win the battle against debt. We need to work as a collection. We need to work and influence as a continent, and we need to join hands and forces because in unity there is strength. And I was happy hearing him talk about COVID. Yeah, we have done away with the masks. The public health problem part of it is gone. But as he has rightly put it, the challenge around the debt associated with the devastation of COVID-19 still remains. And what is it that Africa as a continent can do to address that? The issue of climate change is a serious issue, and there is indeed a need to look at what we can do as a continent to address that particular challenge. Thank you so much. Actually, I thought he would mention the portfolios that he has held. You would see from the way he was addressing the issues that he is speaking with authority, because he has been a minister before. He was speaking with authority as a member of parliament, but at the same time, you would actually look at the issues, how he was connecting them, that indeed he is speaking from an academic point of view, looking at what he is presently doing. And as a matter of fact, some of the issues that he has highlighted here are contained in one of the publications that he is working on. And we can't wait to get to read your publication, Doc. And we are proud that Africa is indeed producing solutions as far as these conversations are concerned. Now, having said that, allow me to invite our panelists who will now start unpacking the issues that we want to look at this morning. Allow me to invite Mr. Andrew Kumbatira to come and take your seat right in front. Let me stand here. Mr. Andrew Kumbatira is coming from Malawi, and he's an economist by training, and he has worked in different positions in Malawi. He worked as a Director General of the Malawi Communications Regulatory Authority. This is a regulatory body established under the Act of Parliament to regulate the communication sector in Malawi. He also worked as a Postmaster General, and for 5 years he also worked as an Executive Director of the Malawi Economic Justice Network, where he is presently serving as a board member. And let's give him a round of applause. Let me also invite Ms. Shenai Mukumba to come and take your position in front. She is the Executive Director at the Task Justice Network Africa, and she's based in Nairobi. And she provides in her role strategic leadership and direction to deliver on Tax Justice Network Africa mission and vision in various thematic areas. She will dig more into the issues that Dr. Moyo has highlighted, but focusing more on the taxation part of it. and how that could also inform debt justice, as we'll be unpacking what Dr. Moyo just shared. Another round of applause for Shania. And the third panelist that we have this morning is Mr. Bridges Bomba. He is the program director for Trust Africa. This is a Pan-African foundation that works across Africa to promote democratic governance. And in his role, he also does quite a lot in terms of initiating some of these conversations that we are looking at, but also convening and ensuring that knowledge generation and management on these issues that we are discussing this morning happen. Another round of applause to him. Now, gentlemen, you have heard what Dr. Moyo has just shared. And I want to start our conversations this morning by looking at debt justice with regards to the common man that in our respective organizations we are also representing. And I would like to kickstart our discussions this morning with Mr. Kumbatira, building on your experience as a board member of the Malawi Economic Justice, but also a former executive director in that institution, where, among others, you have been looking at the issue of promotion of participatory economic governance and advocacy, particularly looking at the plight of poor people, more especially poor Malawians. I just wanted to connect that with what Dr. Moyo has shared this morning, but looking at that particular mandate from a human rights perspective. Because the issues that Dr. Moyo has highlighted this morning, we cannot divorce them from the human rights perspective. So I would like to establish from where you are coming from as the executive director of the Malawi Economic Justice Network, and in the role that the institution has been playing and continues to play as a coalition that looks at participatory economic governance and advocating for the reduction of the problems that poor people in Africa and Malawi in particular are facing. I just wanted you to dig a bit deeper into this particular noble role of promotion of participatory economic governance, but looking at the extent to which debt justice can be reflected or looked at as a human rights issue. Do we really have to look at issues around promotion of debt justice as a human rights issue? Let's start from there as we connect the pieces from what Dr. Moyo stopped.
Thank you very much, Macpherson, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, are we here? Yeah, I saw Opa was in the room. Is he still here? Ah, great. Okay, so it's an honor for me to be speaking here in front of Opa, whom I consider the Archbishop of the issues of debt and aid in Africa. He's really a giant, and yeah, we thank you for the work that you have done. Thank you, Dr. Moyo, for raising the issues that you have raised in your presentation this morning. You've just hit the nail on the head, talking about the storm, the global storms. Indeed, I think there's no better way to explain what is going on as a global storm. Now, the issue is that, as we all know, this ultimately affects the rural woman in the village, the poor girl, the girl child, the vulnerable, the ones that we really represent. When you look at all the storms that Dr. Moyo referred to, ultimately, at the end of the day, they are really hitting very hard the most vulnerable in our societies. The percentages that live below the poverty line, those are the ones that these things are hitting. Imagine is a coalition which is promoting the participation of these very people that do not even have the capacity to participate. And we should capacitate them so they can participate. The issues that have been raised, and most of them really being emerging China, emergence of China, the war in Ukraine, climate change, the storms, the cyclones that are hitting our economies. These indeed are things that we should be talking about. Today, the US dollar has also come under the spotlight. To what extent are we going to use the US dollar as the currency of trade in debt discourse? What kind of research is happening around issues like this? But ultimately, these are human rights issues because debt distress goes to directly affect service delivery, schools, education, health delivery. These get affected, and the people that get affected really hard are the most vulnerable. And therefore, this is nothing else but a human rights issue, which we really need to think through, think about, and be present and well positioned to deal with it when it comes to the table, when it's being discussed. Do we have the capacity? Do they have the capacity? Are they welcome? Are we welcome? How come others attempt to shave our heads in our presence or in our absence? We heard yesterday the issues of trade and development, the weak structures of our economies, and how vulnerable our economies are, even to survive, just to provide food for our citizens. Even that we are failing as countries. And so these are real deep human rights issues that conferences like this should be able to unravel and bring solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kumbatira. Now, let me just connect what you have said, that these issues are human rights issues on account of how they are indeed affecting the common man and making the common man fail to enjoy these rights that you have mentioned in as far as good service delivery and other areas are concerned. Let me connect where you have stopped with the issue of domestic resource mobilization. I'm now turning to you, Shenai. I would like to establish, just building on what Dr. Moyo said with regards to those storms. You would notice one thing that looking at all those issues as problems, there is an element of our countries not being able to raise sufficient resources internally to make sure that the promotion of human rights issues that Mr. Kumbatira has mentioned are indeed being promoted. And the issue now is there should be a need to enhance domestic resource mobilization and broadening of the tax base, which normally is recommended as a good practice in as far as debt management conversations are concerned. But the challenge now is while conversations around this are making a recommendation around improvement on domestic resource mobilization, this still remains a serious challenge. And we are seeing the deaths still rising, while in every conversations and discussions around this, the issue of enhancing domestic resource mobilizations comes as a recommendation. Now, from your experience, where are our African countries missing it?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. And also, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this panel, to the organizers of this session, ZimCode. So that question is an important one. And the reason I say that is because the connection between debt and tax is a crucial one. When you think about debt, often, although not all the time, often we have found that many countries find themselves within situations of debt because they've been unable to raise resources domestically to fund their infrastructure, right? And so the inability of African countries to raise sufficient resources for their own developmental objectives is part of the reason why we find ourselves within our debt situation. And unfortunately, if the debt that we accrue is done in a way that is not open, that is not transparent, at the end of the day, it ends up being the citizens that are going to have to bear the brunt of the burden of paying back that debt liability. And so what we need to first figure out as African countries, and I talk from an overview perspective because all African countries are different, right? What we need to get right is the way in which we are raising our resources and what we need to do in order to prevent the loss of these resources. By way of quick background, Tax Justice Network Africa, the institution that I work with, is part of a consortium of NGOs called the Stop the Bleeding campaign. The Stop the Bleeding campaign consists of 7 different organizations, TJNA, Trust Africa, Afrodad, as well as a few others. And as a group of regional organizations, our preoccupation is with this idea that we need to stop the bleeding of resources from the African continent. The thinking being we are a rich continent. This is not new. We talk about it all the time. Yet we find ourselves being in some of the most poorest of situations, right? And so one of the ways we need to address this is by curbing the loss of our resources. And to the extent that we can get this right will be one step in addressing the situation of debt within which we find ourselves. And so what are some of the steps, right, that we can take as far as raising revenues, as far as tax is concerned? There's a couple of different things. The first is we need to look at the structure of our economies, right? Many of our economies have highly informal spaces. And many of our governments have struggled with how it is that they can include these informal spaces within our economy. And so thinking about how it is we can capture some of the value that is being made within the informal sector is important. But when I say that, I must make a caveat that the informal sector is not homogeneous, right? It is heterogeneous. There are certain individuals, certain companies that use the informal sector to actually avoid paying taxes, right? And so when I talk about looking at the informal sector, I'm talking about those particular corporates, individuals who are essentially hiding within the informal sector that we need to target. The other thing that we need to look at as far as expanding our tax base is concerned is the way in which our current rules and regulations can be exploited, or the gaps that exist that particularly multinational corporations are able to use to exploit to funnel resources out of our countries. So as an institution, we talk about this phenomenon called illicit financial flows, right? And for those of you who've been in this space, right, you're well aware that as a continent, we're losing close to $90 billion on an annual basis. 65% of those resources is attributed to the activities of multinational corporations, right? And so as countries, what we need to do is put in place mechanisms to prevent the abuse of our legislation by multinational corporations. And so that's one of the things that we need to do. Now, a lot of the things that I've spoken about, however, speak to national level actions that we need to do, right? So we need to look at the structure of our economies. We need to look at the activities of multinational corporations. We need to look at some of the legislation that we have in place. But as has been mentioned and was discussed yesterday, we don't operate within a vacuum, right? So essentially, a lot of what happens at national level is also contributed to by activities that are happening at the international level. And so as African countries, we need to continuously push for reform of the international financial architecture, right? In order to increase the extent to which we can raise resources domestically. Within the tax space, there is currently a conversation happening to see the extent to which developing countries, African countries, have a fair say with regards to discussions that can contribute to them being able to maximize their taxing rights. So as African countries, we need to come together. So my point being here, there are steps that we need to take at national level that I've spoken to, but also similarly at international level. Because at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, the relationship between debt and tax is intrinsic, and also debt is deferred tax liability, right? We will have to use our taxes, our own domestic resources, to pay for it at the end of the day. Thanks, McPherson.
Thank you so much. Talking about structure of our economies has to be seriously looked into. The need to push for reforms has to be considered, but also taking into account that the informal sector is also making a contribution to issues around tax. Very important points there. Now I want to continue the conversations, now bringing another dimension of the discussion that Dr. Moyo highlighted, the issue around climate change. I wanted to share what the International Institute for Environment and Development indicated, that the world's most climate vulnerable countries, and in their indication, there are specific African countries that are mentioned, some of which are Senegal, Angola, and Lesotho, indicating that they are being forced to spend billions more paying off their debt than they are receiving in help to beat climate change. Issues of climate financing that Dr. Moyo talked about, that as much as resources are being raised, but a lot is being spent to finance climate-related vulnerabilities, which are not mainly caused by African countries, but African countries are feeling the pinch and spending more. Now, I wanted to bring Mr. Bomba into the conversations just to look at issues around climate financing, just as Dr. Moyo hinted. Now we want to look at what initiatives do you think African countries can advocate that can help to promote more ecosystems that would save those that have contributed the least to climate change devastations that we are experiencing. Are there any areas of advocacy that we can engage in the discussions that can change how things are happening presently to ensure that the contribution of those that are contributing more to the devastations is also raised, contrary to the case which we are experiencing as a continent at the moment?
Thank you, moderator. I think Chennai adequately dealt with that part of the question, but I will give certain remarks that will answer not as directly, but speak to the general questions around financing. And as I get into it, I also want to add my appreciation for your legacy, Opa, and kicking us off yesterday on a very firm intellectual tip, and echo our keynote when he said there's been a de-intellectualization of the space, and sometimes we celebrate that, but it is very limiting in terms of what we put on the table, in terms of the solutions that we then pursue. So I think understanding that intellectual discourse is an important site of the struggle that we are engaged in right now is absolutely critical. So I'm quite happy and excited that in these 2 days, at least, we seem to be elevating the level of discourse. And I think it's important to always anchor ourselves in a correct characterization of the moment. So again, echoing what came from our keynote, that this is a moment of crisis. It came again, I think, even from the lecture yesterday. But it's crisis in a very specific sense. In a way, we are no longer talking about problems, because crisis is that other deeper level where in order to find a solution, you actually need a paradigm shift. You cannot solve a crisis by the level of thinking that can allow you to solve a problem, which is something that is of a limited extent. So it's a multiple intersecting crisis on all fronts. It's a crisis of multilateralism, if you want to look at it that way. The UN is paralyzed. The International Criminal Court is paralyzed. There's no multilateral framework that can deliver in terms of what they were imagined to be able to deliver. The IMF, the World Bank, all of these frameworks are paralyzed. It's a massive crisis on the climate front. In fact, we stand on the precipice of possible existential consequences to humanity if we don't act urgently to resolve what we are facing on the climate front. It's a crisis in terms of democracy. Just look at what is happening in West Africa, but across the continent, the number of coups or the reversals we are seeing in terms of, the democratization process. It's a crisis in terms of the economy, the inequality, so it's a multiple faceted crisis that is most felt here on the continent. So part of what I want to put to the table in terms of adding to our characterization of this moment is that in essence, we are at the end of what I want to call it the end of a historical cycle. The ideas that have served us, that have anchored us, our thinking on all these fronts have become exhausted. That's why France is struggling in West Africa. It's an end of a historical cycle of that particular project. Chennai talked about some of the taxation frameworks that are in place. Some of these go back to the end of the First World War. The Bretton Woods institutions are the big ideas that emerged at the end of the Second World War. People sat for 3 weeks in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to design these institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and everything. And they served their purpose for a while. But we have reached a moment where they are exhausted as ideas. So I'm saying that to also mean it's a moment where the task before us is not a task of trying to figure out how we manage our way within the confines and the limitations of these ideas that have become exhausted. It's a moment where we need to think big and to think outside of the limitations of these ideas and put forward truly radical and audacious ideas that can help us address the financing questions that are before us. And those financing questions are at the center of how we imagine development and society's progress across all fronts, whether it's the climate, it's democracy, it's the economy, all the issues that are before us. And in terms of these big ideas, we should not be shy as activists because we're usually accused of, whether it's being radical or all of this. The stewards or the lords of the ideas that have taken us to this moment of peril, this moment of crisis, have themselves acknowledged that we need new ideas to move society forward. Look at the World Economic Forum. All their the last two conferences, they are all looking at society at a critical turning point. There's a big project right now with millions of dollars invested in it by some of the biggest funders that is looking at investing in your big universities to research on the future of capitalism. So there's a massive intellectual project that is underway to define the new rules that will shape this society over the next 100 years or so. So we should not shy away from that debate. And for us, I think, coming much more closely to your question, this is time that we must finally answer the question of why there is a net outflow of wealth from the continent to other jurisdictions. Why we are this rich. He was talking about the lithium in Zimbabwe. We can talk about cobalt and gold in DRC. We can talk about diamonds in South Africa. We can talk about our good climate, our rich soils. But at the same time, we are the poorest. We must finally confront that. And I think the way to confront it is to really have a comprehensive view of this financing question. I liked the fact that yesterday when you listened to Opa, it's as if he had been asked to talk about trade. And this conference is about debt. But he was explaining that in every transaction we are doing, we are getting robbed. And at the end of the day, we are selling off things that we are then going to buy back at 10 times after they've been processed. So a comprehensive look at financing for development means that we are looking at trade, we are looking at investment, we are looking at finance, we are looking at tax in a way that answers the question of the net outflow of wealth from the continent. I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll sort of conclude. A critical part of it is us challenging the global financial architecture, the way it is currently set up. And at the heart of any architecture or the current global financial architecture is the anchor idea. And the anchor idea of this architecture is this idea of liberalism, is this idea of complete and unbridled financialization. And by financialization, we mean that financial motives or financial capital rises to the very apex, above industrial capital, agrarian capital, or other forms of capital. So that's why we are continuing to have these multiple crises, because there's no restraint on financial capital right now. That's why you have these financial engineerings that gave you the crisis, the financial crisis in 2008, that have taken us to where we are. So that idea of completely uncontrolled finance that explains what Chennai was talking about needs to be challenged. There's so many things that we can talk just at that level. But secondly, there's the element of the institutions that then define our global financial architecture. And there's the element of the distribution of decision-making across those institutions. And currently, as Africa, we don't sit on that table. We are such a minute voice in all of this. So we need to challenge and place our voices right at the center. So in short, I'm saying the solution to us being able to finance our needs around climate, finance our needs around the economy, around our governance systems, really lies in us investing in optimizing how we can capture our revenues, how we can track the losses that we are currently experiencing, how we can recover those losses, and how we can invest in good management of our recovered losses and assets so that we can really invest in our development needs without having to resort to debt. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Talking about challenging global financial architecture, and in other conversations, other schools of thought are talking about dismantling altogether. And in other conversations, others are talking about promotion of homegrown solutions as a way to manage all this. So I want, now having heard all our three panelists, I wanted to invite comments and questions from the audience.